Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Hi, Michael Crow here, President, Arizona State University. I want to welcome you to the Democracy and Climate Change Conference here at ASU. We're really excited that all of you can be here. We've decided that universities are probably one of the 5 most important institutions that have failed our society going forward. We've, relative to climate change, we failed to produce the right kind of economic models. We failed to produce scientists that can speak to the public. We failed to produce scientists that can talk among and between different sciences, particularly the social sciences, the behavioral sciences, law, other areas. We've got all kinds of breakdown, all kinds of issues. And so we've been rebuilding this university for 20 years to be on a completely new trajectory, a trajectory of transdisciplinary logic, intellectual fusion, our new College for Global Futures, our new Global Futures Laboratory, the new schools that we built, 4 new schools, the connection throughout everything, the moving of the university to a completely sustainable net zero platform in the entirety of all of our operations. All of that is nothing compared to the importance of what you all are thinking about. You're thinking about how to basically put in place a huge correction. You know, we built our society, our constitution, and our form of capitalism, 250 years ago or so, plus or minus. We built these models, the model of the American Constitution, the model of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. And oh, by the way, we forgot that natural capital was a part of all of that. We forgot that there was a natural system that we were dependent on. We thought nothing of it. We built nothing legally or conceptually properly to consider the complex relationship between humans and the planet, and between humans today and humans in the future, who can be pretty much wounded very badly by actions taken by people today. So we're very excited that you're here. Very excited that we're taking on this task of how do we build a better democracy, a better platform, a better decision-making set of mechanisms, a better set of theories and philosophies and tools and assets to really help us to take on this assignment of how are we going to make it in terms of our relationship with the planet. Remembering the planet doesn't need us, it'll carry on without us. But we definitely need it and all of its assets and all of its natural powers and capabilities and so forth and so on. So welcome to ASU. Welcome to what we call the New American University, egalitarian, highly intellectually driven by excellence, highly desirous of having impact on the broader society. And we're just very, very proud and honored that you all are here, and look forward to working with you. Look forward to seeing some of you around the meeting. Thanks.
Hi. Whoops. Hi. Good evening. Mic works. Welcome to Earth Week 2022 here at Arizona State University. My name is Pat Kenny. I'm the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and we're hosting a small part of a number, dozens and dozens of meetings, symposiums, panels that are going on this week. We are located here tonight in the brand new, newly dedicated building today titled the Rob and Melanie Walton Center for Planetary Health. This beautiful complex is ASU's newest research and learning facility and was named today after ASU supporters and sustainability leaders Rob and Melanie Walton. The new building is home to a number of interesting schools and centers. I'll name just a few: the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Lab, the College of Global Futures, Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Solutions Service, School of Sustainability, the Institute of Human Origins, and the Center for Global Discovery and Conservation Science. Tonight's topic is about democracy and climate change. And the key question tonight is the U.S. democracy able to address the challenges of climate change? And when we got together and planned this event and several panels, we thought there's no better person in the world to talk about this than Vice President Al Gore. All right. He knows democracy from the inside the institutions. Quick reminder, served in the U.S. House of Representatives 77 to 85, U.S. Senator from 1985 to 93, both of those representing his dear and home state of Tennessee, and then Vice President 1993 to 2001. He's dedicated his entire political career and when he left politics with a deep knowledge of climate change and huge interest and sophistication in policy. Now, I could go on and on about how many awards he's won related to this work. I'm just going to mention 3 and turn it over to him. He won the Nobel Peace Prize jointly with the UN International Panel on Climate Change in 2007. He won an Academy Award for Best Documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, in 2007, and he won a Grammy Award for Best Spoken Word Album, An Inconvenient Truth, in 2009. When you combine what he knows about climate and what he knows about democracy, he can answer this question as well as anyone. I turn this over. It's an honor and a privilege to introduce Vice President Al Gore.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Dean Patrick Kennedy, for that generous introduction. We have a close mutual friend in Dean John Gore at Vanderbilt. I want to also thank Dean Peter Schlosser, with whom I've had the opportunity to work in the past. And while I know he's unable to attend this evening, I also want to extend my thanks to ASU President Michael Crow, who you just heard on that excellent video, for inviting me to speak to you at this inaugural Democracy and Climate Change Conference. It really is an honor to be with you tonight. May I say I'm thrilled my colleague from the Climate Reality Project, Will Barber, is there with you in person and will be participating in the agenda you pulled together for this conference. And I'm honored that Maya Sotoro Ng is here with us, the sister of former President Obama, and will be a part of this important discussion as well. Let me also begin by saying I have deep admiration for Arizona State University's commitment to our environment and the planet. You were the first university in the United States to have a school dedicated to sustainability, and you proudly have the largest solar energy portfolio of any American university, harnessing Arizona's abundant sunshine to your advantage. I'm so pleased that you're furthering this commitment and your vision for the Global Futures Laboratory and the College of Global Futures. Indeed, our future and the future of our democracy are inextricably bound to the success or failure of our response to the climate crisis, which is, of course, what I'm primarily here to speak with you about today, and the relationship between the climate crisis and American democracy. As the impacts of the climate crisis have grown far more visible and more severe in recent years, we've seen an increased awareness of the existential threat it represents. And yet, despite decades of dire warnings from scientists around the world, we continue to spew 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the thin shell of atmosphere surrounding our planet every single day, as if it were an open sewer. No charge, free to use it as a sewer. And it stays there on average, each molecule, about 100 years. The math is complex, but the scientists tell me that's an acceptable generalization. And so it mounts up, and the accumulated amount now traps as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding on Earth every 24 hours. And the consequences of all that extra heat energy are all around us. 19 of the 20 hottest years ever measured have been in the last 20 years. In Arizona, temperatures have already risen about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the beginning of the 20th century. And in this century, the first 21 years of this century have been by far the warmest period on record for Arizona. Largely as a result, the Western United States is also in the midst of an historic drought, being referred to as the Millennium Drought, a drought that has already generated significant and unprecedentedly severe wildfire seasons across the region. In fact, in California, 6 of the 7 largest fires ever recorded in the state's history have occurred during the last 2 fire seasons. In Arizona, currently 86% of the state is in drought, including nearly 60% in severe drought. And for the first time ever, water supplies from the Colorado River are being cut due to ongoing water shortages connected to the heat and the drought. That means mandatory cutbacks this year for Arizona farmers, some by as much as 60%. There are likely to be even larger cuts coming in the next 2 years that will begin to restrict water supplies for cities in Arizona as well. The river has lost 20% of its water in the last 22 years. But ultimately, 93% of the extra heat in our now being trapped in our atmosphere is absorbed by the world ocean, and ocean temperatures are reaching record high levels as well every year. Warmer ocean temperatures fuel stronger hurricanes and typhoons and strengthen and enlarge the atmospheric rivers that then cross the land masses and result in rain bombs, dumping huge amounts of precipitation along their paths. There were several such events just within the last week around the world. More than 250 people killed in Durban, South Africa, for example. These climate impacts are displacing people at an enormous scale. Of the 30.7 million people who were displaced from their homes in 2020, the large majority of them were fleeing climate-related weather disasters, including drought, famine, floods, and wildfires, not to mention sea level rise. In addition to those who have already been displaced, the Lancet Commission and others have predicted that we could see as many as 1 billion climate refugees in this century. Already the refugees from climate events are 4 times larger than the refugees from all of the wars, or at least that was the case prior to Russia's horrific invasion of Ukraine. The flows of climate refugees have already awakened xenophobia in some of the developed nations to which they're migrating in growing numbers, and there's already documented evidence in some wealthy nations that this has meaningfully contributed to the rise of populist authoritarianism and the threat to democracy. We see it here in the United States as immigrants from Latin America, principally Central America, which is one of the most vulnerable regions to the climate crisis, as they trek north because the extreme temperatures and ongoing droughts are ruining crops and destroying livelihoods. Families are making harrowing journeys to the borders of the United States only to be villainized and used as scapegoats for our country's problems when they arrive at the border. Unfortunately, because the impacts of the climate crisis are getting more severe at a much faster rate than we are yet deploying the solutions, we're going to see many more millions of people displaced by this crisis, especially if we fail to take decisive action now. There is also good news, and the good news includes the fact that we have at our disposal today all of the solutions that we need to solve this crisis. The International Energy Agency says that in order to cut emissions in half by 2030, which is what scientists say we need to do if we want to be on the pathway to limit global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees C, all of the technologies we need are already fully developed along with proven deployment strategies. Indeed, we are now in the early stages of a sustainability revolution that has the potential to completely reshape the world for the better by transforming our relationship to businesses, the environment, and to one another. This global sustainability revolution has the scale of the industrial revolution coupled with the speed of the digital revolution, and it's giving many business executive teams the ability to manage electrons, atoms, molecules, genes, and proteins with the same degree of proficiency that the IT companies have long since demonstrated in their management of bits of information. So around the globe, the market for clean energy has been transformed with dizzying speed. Think back to 1 year before the leaders of the world came together in Paris to craft the Paris Agreement. In 2014, solar and wind electricity was cheaper than electricity from new coal and gas plants in only 1% of the world. But 5 years later, solar and wind electricity was the cheapest source of new electricity in more than 2/3 of the world. And in the next 5 years, it will be cheaper in virtually 100% of the world. It's now the cheapest electricity in history. At the end of 2015, when the Paris Agreement was adopted, total global solar capacity was 249 gigawatts. Experts now predict that that much will be added just this year. In 2022, China alone is expected to add as much solar PV as the entire world added in 2017. In the United States, the amount of wind power capacity is more than double what it was 10 years ago, and solar power generating capacity is 20 times greater than it was a decade ago. And this also means employment. The fastest growing job over the next decade in the US is projected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to be wind turbine technician. One of the top three is solar panel installer. Over the 5 years prior to the pandemic, solar jobs in the US grew 5 times faster than average job growth. In many nations, the ever increasing cost advantages of clean energy are leading to the replacement and early retirement of existing coal and gas facilities, even if they have decades of useful life remaining. Countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam are right now canceling their plans to build new coal plants and are instead moving to clean renewable energy. For 60% of the coal plants around the world, it is already cheaper today to just shut them down and replace them with new solar and wind. In fact, the largest new fossil fuel electricity generating plant in Australia was just shut down not long after it was completed because it's much cheaper to just shut it down and replace it with solar. In the European Union, that's the case for over 90% of the coal plants, and it will be true very soon for nearly all coal plants in the entire world by the end of this decade. And of course, look at the potential for renewable energy in Arizona. Solar has the technical potential to provide 165 times more electricity than the entire state currently uses. However, due to some uneven policy choices that have injected uncertainty into the market, Arizona has barely fulfilled any of that potential. Arizona does now generate 9% of electricity from solar, and that's not an insignificant number. But when you compare it to neighbors like Nevada, which generates 18% of its power from solar, and California, which generates 26%, it's clear that Arizona could be moving much more quickly. Of course, the impact of this sustainability revolution reaches far beyond changes in the energy sector. It's already widespread across almost all sectors of the economy. Companies are reinventing transportation. Electric cars are now approaching cost competitiveness with gas guzzlers. Within the next year, many EV model sizes are due to become cheaper than their internal combustion counterparts. And over the next 3 to 4 years, all EV model sizes will be cheaper than all of their combustion counterparts. In 2016, there were a total of 1 million electric vehicles globally. The year before, OPEC predicted that by 2040, there might be 4.7 million EVs on the road. Well, they were badly wrong. As of right now, we have 20 million electric vehicles on the road already, or that'll be the case this summer. And in the second half of this year, we'll be adding another million EVs every single month, as many as we had total in the world just a few years ago. Innovation in the agricultural sector is also poised to play a significant role in reducing emissions. Breakthroughs with the meat alternatives are providing consumers with attractive options for protein-rich meals. And meanwhile, the farmer-led movement toward regenerative agricultural practices can help enable agriculture to actually sequester a substantial amount of greenhouse gas emissions in the soil and become part of the solution to the climate crisis instead of remaining as part of the problem. And we're also seeing incredible advances in the ways that we're able to apply digital tools to reduce energy consumption, to better integrate renewable energy into electrical grids, and to retool workplaces for greater productivity. These are positive trends that need to be accelerated and need to be built into the system. This is what is needed, a complete rethink of relationships among business, investors, markets, governments, and one another. Embracing the sustainability revolution is the best way to keep our planet and our people healthy, to grow our economy over the long run, to tap into markets of the future, and create tens of millions of good new green jobs. So, why haven't we deployed these solutions at the speed and scale that this crisis requires? Well, one of the reasons is that the influence of money in politics and the evolution of our media ecosystem have led to the degradation of our system of democracy and to an epistemological crisis among the American people. I'm embarrassed to tell you, it wasn't that long ago I had to look up epistemology in the dictionary. It's the science of how we decide what has meaning and what doesn't, how we determine the truth as we can best determine it. But fossil fuel companies and their backers have spent lavishly for decades, more than $1 billion, to capture and control the policymaking process in key countries and to cynically lie to publics around the world about the climate crisis, even though they knew full well that their public persuasion campaigns were based on absolute falsehoods. They have found these kinds of strategies to be so effective that they have relied on them very heavily to overturn what the truth is and to replace it with a false vision of their own creation that leads to policies that are friendly to their bottom line. They have helped to foster a culture of denial, doubt, and extreme hyperpartisanship. One where instead of looking first at the evidence and then deciding which political position matches up with that evidence, we begin with our political identity first and then ask which so-called evidence our political tribe supports. Even the latest IPCC report just out 2 weeks ago highlighted the impact of these tactics. The world's leading climate scientists concluded, and I quote, "The accurate transference of the climate science has been undermined significantly by climate change counter movements in both legacy and new social media environments through misinformation," end quote. Well, you've all heard about AI, artificial intelligence. There's another form of AI that now risks undermining the foundations of democracy: artificial insanity. This insanity is a social disorder, one that is facilitated by the manipulation of the media ecosystem that exists today. When our founders first developed our system of constitutional representative democracy, as flawed as it was due to our founders' callous indifference to the evils of slavery, the genocide against Native Americans, and the inequity facing women, we nevertheless had an information ecosystem that lifted up truth more than what we see today, an ecosystem that was vastly different from what we have today. Our founders had a brilliant piece of what you might refer to as software called the American Constitution that allowed us to regularly harvest the wisdom of crowds. When citizens of a democracy share common values and can communicate freely in a public forum that allows all to participate on an equal basis, the distance separating their points of view and life experiences and their diversity enhances our collective ability to distill that collective wisdom into better decisions than any other nation was capable of making. However, when diversity in a society is used to stir resentments and divide us, we're in danger of losing the ability to work together for the good of all. And that is what is happening in our information ecosystem today. Now, it's not an entirely new tactic. It's newly effective with social media and centralized ownership of broadcasting. But the manipulation of the media ecosystem and of systems of education has been used throughout human history to undermine the will of the people, undermine democracy, and stall progress for the public interest of all. For example, universal access to education was opposed in colonial America by wealthy landowners and the elites who feared threats to their power and the diminishment of their labor force if the laborers had access to new skills and knowledge and education. In the United States, Thomas Jefferson, when he was governor of Virginia, advocated for a system of public education that would give people of all classes the opportunity to go to school for free. Now, again, Blacks and women were not on equal footing, to say the least, but nevertheless, it was a revolutionary idea at the time. But Jefferson's proposal was adamantly opposed by the elites in Virginia who wanted to maintain their own power by limiting the understanding of our new system of democracy and limiting participation in it. You can see similar efforts to control the media and education systems in authoritative regions around the world today. In Afghanistan, the Taliban quickly reversed its promises to allow the education of girls to continue. In Afghanistan, now girls over the age of 12 are prohibited from receiving any formal education. In China, their Great Firewall rigorously limits and restricts the content and education that its citizens have access to. And of course, the government's ethnic cleansing of the Uyghur population, including what they call re-education, is a clear example of how authoritarian attempts to control information and education can be taken to the extreme. The structure of our media ecosystem has undoubtedly contributed to the hyper-partisan nature of discourse that you see in the United States today. Fake news continues to proliferate, genuinely fake news, and social media algorithms are famously leading people down rabbit holes. And you know what's at the bottom of the rabbit hole? That's the echo chamber. And when people spend long enough in the echo chamber, that's when the new AI, artificial insanity, takes hold. Take Facebook, for example. In 2018, Facebook changed its core algorithm to emphasize outrage in order to make more money. They made a conscious decision to give priority to messages that made people as angry as they could get them to be. And once you click on one such message, then they say, oh, you like that? We've got some more. And they feed more and more such articles and posts that feed that anger. That's the beginning of the rabbit hole. In fact, you could say in some ways, Facebook's algorithm 18 was just as harmful as COVID-19. Indeed, algorithm 18 and social media generally was one of the reasons why COVID-19 has been so difficult to get under control, as conspiracy theories about the vaccine and the virus itself have spread like another contagion. Voltaire once said, if you can get people to believe absurdities, you can convince them to commit atrocities. The volume of information available to us has an impact as well. We live in a culture of mass distraction where people don't feel as though they have the time to participate in their democracy and are overwhelmed by the amount of trivial information designed to capture their attention and to activate parts of the brain other than our reasoning capacity presented to them day in and day out. And when average citizens disengage from the process of democracy, moneyed interests are quick to step in and fill that void. When it comes to the climate crisis, the fossil fuel industry has been able to pour vast amounts of money into this messy media ecosystem and into our governmental operations to the detriment not only of our democracy, but to the lives and livelihoods of people around the world. They have introduced confusion and doubt into the minds of the public, as well as our political leaders. This influence is a perfect example of why one of the most important things we need to do to restore democracy is to get big money out of politics. And we also, and I know it's hard to do, but there are ways to do it. And we also need to stop lining the pockets of anti-democratic leaders and autocrats who rely on the fossil fuel industry to prop up their regimes. Russia's horrific war in Ukraine is, of course, now the prime example. It is a fossil fuel war, a war funded in large part by the revenue generated from Russia's sale of its oil, gas, and coal resources. Europe's reliance on those resources continues to hamper the effectiveness of the robust sanctions regime that has united Western governments around the democratic ideals that Putin seeks to undermine. We are allowing democracy to be held hostage by our suicidal reliance on energy resources controlled by murderous autocrats. This moment in time, marked by the invasion of Ukraine, should be, and still could be, an epiphany for our global civilization. It's time to change. It's not a time for moral cowardice and reckless indifference to the future of humanity. We cannot allow fossil fuel companies and their allies to cynically use this conflict as an opportunity to move us backward in the transition toward a clean and sustainable future. That's where you come in. Our sustainable transition can be greatly supported by your work in this university. As seekers and bearers of truth and knowledge, I'm here not simply to talk to you, I'm here to recruit you. We need you badly. Academic institutions can help to lead the charge in our fight to solve the climate crisis. We cannot successfully build a more sustainable future without your help, but with your help, I'm convinced we can. And not only do we need you in the fight against the climate crisis, we also need your help in fighting the epistemology crisis that threatens democracy as well. That's why it's more important than ever to invest in educational institutions like Arizona State University and ensure that everyone develops the critical thinking skills to help parse out what is fact and separate it from self-serving fictions promoted by the large polluters. It is also why it is important for academic institutions like ASU to reject funding from the fossil fuel industry. They have colonized some universities and they are seeking to warp climate-related research. And in the past, it has been weaponized against climate action. Some of them are no longer denialist, but they most definitely are delayist. This kind of clear conflict of interest should no longer be tolerated by academic institutions committed to sustainability. If you will permit me to say so, I would also urge that ASU fully divest from fossil fuel holdings in its endowment. I've made that argument to many universities and some have made that switch. I hope that you will seriously consider doing so. I know you've made significant progress in that direction, and I applaud the progress that the school has made toward divestment, even as I encourage you to move further faster. Now, before we open this conversation up for questions, let me end my remarks with one more reason for optimism. I know, believe me, I know that it's easy to feel a sense of despair and anxiety at times in the face of all the news about the future of our democracy and our planet. I want to encourage those of you who are tempted to feel despair about the state of the climate crisis and our democracy to resist that temptation strongly. Instead, focus on this critical step in fighting this anxiety, and that critical step is action. As I've said, we have the solutions we need right now to take action, to reduce emissions, transition to cleaner energy, improve lives in communities around the world, and clean up the air and the water and the land. And the good news further is that we can be successful in this fight. One of the findings well hidden in the IPCC report, that 3,000 pages of it that I mentioned earlier, is that once we reach true net zero, global temperatures could stop going up with a lag time of as little as 3 to 5 years. And if we stay at true net zero, half of all the human-caused CO2 will fall out of the atmosphere in as little as 25 to 30 years. It's as if we can flip a switch, and we can do this. All we're missing is the political will. But if anybody thinks that we can't generate sufficient political will, please remember that political will is itself a renewable resource. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We worked closely with Vice President Gore's team, and we have 3 questions that we've sent over, and so we have people who've been working on this team to ask those, and we'll go right ahead. Thank you. Magda?
Thank you so much, Vice President Gore, for that very motivating speech. My question is this. There are interesting parallels between the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change crisis. Action on both has been hampered by science deniers, and effective action on both has been complicated by the need to act collectively. What lessons have governments learned at the local, national, and global levels from the pandemic that might inform how we address the climate change crisis? Thank you.
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. And it's actually a question I've thought quite a bit about over the past couple of years. The pandemic and the climate crisis actually raised some of the same fundamental questions. First, when the world scientific community is warning us in ever more dire terms about an impending catastrophe, should we listen to them? Yes. And because they were right in the past, we should pay even more attention to what they're warning us about in our future. Second, can our interconnected global civilization suddenly be turned upside down? Yes. Third, are the poor and marginalized and discriminated against populations the ones most affected? Yes, with both the pandemic and the climate crisis. Fourth, can science and technology quickly provide us with solutions in record time? Yes, absolutely. And the fifth and most important question, one we're still grappling with for both COVID-19 and the climate crisis, is will we deploy those solutions in time? We have an incredible ability to innovate and develop solutions, but as I've said earlier, political will sometimes lags far behind, particularly when it's artificially manipulated. We've created a life-saving vaccine, but we have failed to distribute it equitably and fully. Likewise, we have the solutions to solve the climate crisis, but those solutions are not being deployed at anywhere near close to the speed and scale needed to confront the climate crisis. Scientists and innovators have already responded, and they've given us the tools we need. Now it's up to us to muster the political will to implement those solutions and restore the integrity of our democracy. It's been incredibly clear with the rise of a number of new variants and the continuing struggle we face to contain this virus and all its mutations, that the solutions we need can't be implemented piecemeal and gradually. With COVID, as with the climate crisis, it will take all of us doing our part, both individually and as citizens, affecting the policies developed by local and state and national governments.
Thank you, Vice President Gore. I'm asking a question on behalf of an ASU student, Brian Macinas, who was unable to be here this evening. Brian is a junior majoring in sustainability and is participating in tomorrow's panel on climate justice. He asks, in regards to private industry influence on legislative affairs, what do you think it would take to fully push bigger actors in the corporate sector to begin lobbying in support of bold climate solutions to push back on the efforts of the existing fossil fuel lobby to maintain the status quo?
Another great question, and actually we're already starting to see a significant number of corporations and private sector businesses step up here. In most cases, it's the consumer-facing companies that are leading the way, and why is that? It's because of the pressure they're getting from their customers. It's people in the generation of the students assembled here that are starting to really hold these businesses' feet to the fire and demand change. And your power is not just as a consumer, you have power as a prospective employee as well. Business leaders tell me that young people are interviewing them when they're applying for a job instead of the other way around. And young people are choosing more and more to work at companies that have made commitments to address the most important issues of their lifetimes. And employees are demanding more and more action from their employers. They're focused intently on whether their company's words match their actions. We need to see more of that change from within. As I said in my remarks, I think that ultimately we need to get big money out of politics, and we need to find a way to reverse the Citizens United decision, which says which defines corporations as people and then gives them the right to make unlimited amounts of anonymous contributions, dark money, to influence the formation of policies. Corporations are not people. They don't die. In many cases, they don't pay taxes either. But ultimately, changing corporations and changing businesses from within is the best way to diminish the influence of fossil fuel companies.
Mr. Gore, first of all, thank you for a great address, and thank you for years of leadership on climate issues. I want to follow the last question very simply with what changes you would propose specifically in law and political behavior as well as money. The first warning on climate change was given to a U.S. president in 1965. We still have no de jure climate policy. So very quickly, to follow up much of what you said, what would you propose specifically in politics, regulation, and law? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And before answering, let me just note that warning in 1965 was given to President Lyndon Johnson by my mentor, Professor Roger Revelle. Just a couple of years after that, I walked into his course as an undergraduate more than 50 years ago, and he opened my eyes, and I've been on this journey since then. And now to your question. As I mentioned in my remarks, the corrupting role of big money in politics has badly hindered the political process. In recent years, a majority of Americans have expressed strong support for federal action to solve the climate crisis on a bipartisan basis. The overwhelming majority of Americans favor rapidly developing renewable energy sources like wind and solar over the expansion of oil, coal, and methane, or natural gas as it's been branded. And among young people, there has been a striking change among Republicans as well. Millennial Republicans are nearly twice as likely as Gen X or baby boomers to support climate action. In fact, more than 55 college young Republican clubs recently joined together to write a letter to the Republican National Committee warning it to change its position on the climate crisis lest they lose that entire generation. So the bipartisan support is there, but it has become harder and harder for people to make their voices heard. The basic promise of democracy is under attack as voting rights are being restricted across the country. We should be empowering people across the country to become active participants in our democracy, not making it more difficult. Every time I ran for political office, from my first campaign in 1976 for the U.S. House of Representatives to my second campaign for president in 2000, in every one of those campaigns, my platform included a proposal for full public funding of federal elections. And that may sound like it's very difficult to achieve, but here is the virtue of it. Because of the difficulties I alluded to in restricting the role of big money in politics, the way to do it is with a quid pro quo. We used to have such a system. Here's a trick question. In the election for president of 1980, between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, how much money did the two candidates raise in contributions combined? The answer is zero, because we then had full public financing. And the quid pro quo I referred to is that in return for receiving adequate public funding, then that can be accompanied by a restriction on the ability to raise money from lobbyists and special interests, and other private donors. That used to be our system for presidential elections. I think it ought to be restored and extended to House and Senate elections. And for those of you who say that sounds impossible, I invite you to consider, how is it possible for our democracy to survive if we allow wealthy special interests to buy elections? When I went into politics in the mid-70s, I didn't have a single fundraiser. By the time I left politics, the average member of Congress was spending, and is now spending, 5 to 6 hours every single day begging lobbyists for money, dialing for dollars, going to cocktail parties, and engaging in these shadow boxing conversations that have their own quid pro quo. How much money will you contribute? Well, what will your position be on this legislation that I've written and want you to introduce? Even though it's written by a corporation, will you pretend that it's yours? Yes, and that's what's happening. The special interests are writing the legislation in many cases, and they're blocking legislation that promotes the public interest. And specifically where the climate crisis is concerned, that is why we have had virtually nothing that actually reduces the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is using our atmosphere as an open sewer. You know, if you could drive an automobile straight up in the air at the same speed you drive on an interstate highway, you'd get to the top of the sky in about 5 minutes. The top of the sky is defined as where you can't breathe anymore, above that, and where all the greenhouse gas pollution is below you. That's how thin it is. And we're using it as an open sewer. And those who want to offload the costs of their pollution by just spewing it for free into the sky that we all share, and in the process destroying humanity's future, that has simply got to stop. It is insane. So I'll conclude, you said 3 questions and that's the last one. I'll conclude by once again thanking you for the privilege of speaking to this group, congratulate you on your new initiatives, and again, my purpose is to recruit you. We badly need your help. Get involved. If you're not yet convinced that this is the overarching challenge of your lifetimes, you will be, because the change is getting worse very rapidly. All of our futures are at stake. And if this sounds dire to you, just read the IPCC report. Read what the scientists who are expert in this, who have been completely correct in the past, are saying about our future, unless we act boldly and quickly. Thank you so much for listening to me, and good luck and Godspeed.
Thank you all very much, and we will definitely send messages back to Vice President Gore. Thank you to our hosts. It was wonderful to be here. The sun is down. There is a nice reception outside, so please take a few moments to do that. I don't know if the wind's down, but the sun's down. All right, so enjoy the evening. Thanks so much. And don't forget, if you check on all of the websites across the university, there are events, panels, symposiums every day, almost all day. So thanks so much for coming.